Arcade Heroes.
Hey everyone, this is Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com. Hope you're all doing well and everything, considering how crazy the world has been in 2020. But it's been a while since I've done a vlog, and part of that is because I just haven't had much to talk about. I have attempted to do a podcast with my friend and colleague Kevin Williams at the Stinger Report, but when we were doing the recording, for some reason his audio failed, or my recording stopped capturing his audio, and so we wasted a bunch of time on that. But I just wanted to do something kind of along the lines of what we were talking about in that podcast, as well as from an article that I posted today, and it being July 1st, that is about Sega Amusements International reopening. Now, they are not the first developer or manufacturer to reopen since the pandemic, but they're one of the few that sent out a big press release about it. ICE did one, as well as Raw Thrills kind of did one too. They did more of a newsletter saying that they were back in operation. But either way, there's a concern that's out there with a lot of operators like myself, arcade operators, and wondering, what the future holds. Now, of course, that's a question that everybody's asking is, when is this going to end? When are things going to return to some kind of normalcy? Or what is the new normal going to be like? And how will we adapt to that? But I think the biggest question is, who's going to survive? And now you do have the phrase, only the strong survive, but it's still a concern as to what's going to be left of this industry when the dust settles. Now, this has been exacerbated by a bunch of stories that have been in the media over the past few months, such as Dave & Buster's closing all their locations and then saying they had somewhere around 15 weeks of capital to continue on. Now, of course, since then they have been able to reopen, I believe, most of their locations. Not all of them yet, but a lot of them have reopened. And same thing has happened with Round 1 USA, Main Event, and Chuck E. Cheese's. Chuck E. Cheese's, of course, has been in the news a lot. We did a whole article about that entitled, Will Chuck E. Cheese's Survive? Where I had to point out some of the realities as to Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is what Chuck E. Cheese's filed for. And as a quick review of that, no, that does not mean that Chuck E. Cheese's is done. Chapter 11 bankruptcy gives them some legal protections and gives them time to fix things. And yes, there have been some locations that they've announced will permanently close, but they are the largest arcade chain in the world. Between them and their Peter Piper Pizza locations and their franchisees, they have over 1,000 locations. And so for them so far they've only announced 34 location closings, so 34 out of 1,000 isn't the whole company. It's not even close to a majority. Now, of course, that can change. They could end up closing more locations, and the reason why I'm not celebrating that, like I guess some people might expect me to, because I'm not big on redemption. But I've seen a lot of people say, "Yay! I hope Chuck E. Cheese's dies," or "I'm glad to see them dying," or whatever. And I don't celebrate that because I understand the whole picture. Now, I get that a lot of people don't get into the inside baseball of this business and whatnot, but if Chuck E. Cheese is closed and a lot of those locations went away, now not all of them would, just because you have a lot who are just franchisees, and so franchisees, there's probably some contractual things there to deal with, what to do in case the national franchisor closes, but they probably just rebrand. If their location's still doing well enough to stay open, then they'll stay open just under a different name. And that's what happened with GameWorks some years ago, where a few of you out there may have been to one of the former GameWorks locations that have been renamed to something else. Like I know there was one down in South Florida that was renamed to the Game Room, and not the greatest name, but it was still a pretty cool place. It still felt just like GameWorks did, at least when I was there several years ago. But anyways, the problem with any major chain closing is a big one, and it's a concerning one to us. And so Yesterday, I had a couple of operators come and visit me here at my arcade, and one of them is pretty well known in the business. His name is Russ Minter. He's been doing operations throughout Nevada for many years, and he's also been a part of the AMOA, and a very sharp guy. I love talking with him and getting his advice. But he asked me a question, what do you think is going to happen with our industry, and particularly what's going to happen with these distributors and these manufacturers? I've been in contact with several manufacturers throughout these shutdown months, as well as distributors, and kind of getting an idea of the challenges they're facing and what they're going through. I know some distributors have furloughed staff, some temporarily, some permanently, as sales, of course, have collapsed. And so to help give you an idea of how this industry is set up, what our business model is like, it's based off of vending machines from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so when Atari came onto the scene in the 1970s, they had to work within vending distribution channels and business models to try and sell their product. Now, of course, things have changed a bit. It used to be very territorial, where you would have distributors with exclusive deals over a certain number of zip codes or states and all that. And so that's pretty rare these days. But still, you have this structure set up like this. So first you have your developer and or manufacturer. Sometimes there are just software developers out there who will create a concept and then sell it to a hardware manufacturer like Sega or Rothreels or Namco, and let them do all the manufacturing and sales and technical support and all that. But of course, all these major companies have their own in-house development teams who come up with stuff as well, or they may use a lot of contractors. So you have these companies creating brand new content, and then when they have something, they will generally sell it through a distributor. And so there's a few distributors out there: Benson, Primetime Amusements, Schaefer, Moss Distributing, Player One Group, I think Green Coin, and a few others. And of course, there's different distributors in different countries. Like UK has Electrocoin and UDC. And there's a bunch, but most of the time you don't have the people that distributors are selling to, which would be the operator, which is me, somebody who owns a venue, a location, and puts games into it for players to enjoy. And so direct sales, as they're called, where an operator like myself would say, call up Rothreels and say, hey, I want this game. Most of the time I'd be told, no, go to your distributor. And if not 99% of the time, usually the only time I get direct sales is with independent game creators, like with Cosmotrons or Re-Rave or anything like that. So most big manufacturers do use the distribution network. But the problem we have right now, of course, as mentioned with Chuck E. Cheese's, is that a lot of locations are closing. Some have closed permanently already. Others are hoping to still survive this, but as some places have shut down for a second time, that is throwing the uncertainty back into the mix. But also, this is why the whole situation with what could happen with Dave & Buster's or Chuck E. Cheese's or Round One USA, if they have to close a lot of locations, that means that distributors have fewer buyers and they have fewer sales, and that also trickles down to the manufacturers. If they're not selling more machines, then they're not making money to stay in business. And so it could have a cascade effect of a sort. Now, granted, the arcade industry has been through downturns before. Now, in the past, it's not really been tied to downturns in other places, although I think the crash of 1983 could be linked with there was a little bit of a downturn in the economy around 1982 that most people overlook. And also, I guess, in 2001 to 2004, there also was there was an economic downturn that we rebounded from as a country and a world. but still, like, the arcade industry was really affected by those crashes, whereas in this case it's not just us that's really suffering. Movie theaters are in real trouble, but of course it's a completely different business model because they have to rely on constant fresh content coming out every week or every other week for them to stay afloat, and they can't really get by on showing old movies. Like, I have a movie theater here that is just showing, they reopened a couple of weeks ago, but they've been showing old stuff like The Hunger Games and Lord of the Rings, but every time I've walked past there, it's been completely dead. And on the weekends, I've not had pretty much anybody here saying they're here to see a movie, because it's like, oh, why do I want to go see a movie that I already have on DVD or Blu-ray or streaming or whatever? Whereas in an arcade environment, yeah, we have old games. In fact, I have a Space Invaders from 1978 here, but you still get people wanting to come and play those things because it's a different kind of experience. And oftentimes you can just come in here for a few minutes, play something, and leave, and maybe you won't even run into another person, so you don't have to worry about being stuck in the same room as they are as a bunch of other strangers for 3 hours. And so I think I have optimism that we will come out strong on this eventually, that we will survive. It's just a question of how many locations will survive, how many locations will still be able to buy new product, and then how many manufacturers will survive if there are a lot of closures. Now, one thing that's happening right now, and I have to admit that I'm participating in it too, is that because there have been so many closures, there's a glut of used equipment on the market. And that means there's a lot of great deals, but of course if you're spending your available capital on used equipment, then you're not buying new equipment. And so I think something like Nitro Trucks is available right now, but I just had another operator that I work with offer me a Family Guy bowling by Team Play, and for an amazing price, and it's practically new, but he lost the location where he had the game. And I guess I should have thrown in, that's one thing about how the business model works in the arcade industry, is you have what are called street operations or route operations, and that's whenever you find arcade games put into a movie theater or a restaurant or a gas station or any place where there's a waiting area, and it's the main focus of the business is something else like food or gas or whatever else. But then you have a few arcade games to the side or vending machines and whatnot. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that route operations make up the bulk of people that exist in this industry. A few years back, when Playmeter magazine used to publish their state of the industry reports, they counted how many street operations there were, arcades, and FECs, and they separated these stats out. And out of those numbers, I think there was something like 2,000 places that were classified as arcades, about 3,000 places classified as family entertainment centers, but then over 100,000 places classified as street locations. And so while they make up a vast bulk of potential buyers in this industry, the problem's always been that, well, for one, the size of a lot of the new games don't really work. Like, I couldn't put a Halo Fireteam Raven Super Deluxe into a gas station or a Mission Impossible arcade or a Hologate VR. That would just be nonsensical because it would take up most of, of a tiny place. And so in the past, over the years, street content has generally been very small games, maybe one player or two players, or like maybe some of you who are old enough like me maybe remember when 7-Elevens used to all have a couple of games in a corner, but those were like the old 80s and 90s cabinets, which were maybe about 3.5 feet across, or 3 feet across, or maybe even 2 feet across. So I haven't measured them in a while, but they were small and compact and could fit pretty easily into convenience stores and other places that just didn't have a lot of space to them. But the recent trend in years has been to cater to FECs, and that's why you've been seeing all these enormous games that take up a ton of space. And they are impressive, and they are very cool, and they are a bit more immersive. But of course, their price tags are much higher, anywhere from $12,000 to $35,000. And just not so much of a focus on the standard content. So back to the original question that I was asked by Mr. Minter was, how are these companies going to survive? So in my opinion, whether you want to consider it expert or not, is that major manufacturers, if they really want to get through this, needs to start focusing a little bit more on the street operator instead of the FEC. I mean, one thing that's been clear is a lot of FECs have completely paused their investment cash for purchasing new equipment throughout the rest of 2020. And depending on how things turn out, that could even go into 2021. Now, granted, it does take time to create arcade content. I'd say most games seem to take about 18 months to develop, but that's not always the case. Connect 4 Hoops by Baytech Entertainment, a video basketball game that also can have a redemption component to it. They only spent 6 weeks developing that. Super simple concept. And now granted, that usually does fit more with lines of redemption gaming. Redemption games generally don't need a whole lot of depth to them. But I'm just saying it is possible to have shorter development times, which also is cheaper to do, and still come up with something. Now, of course, maybe Connect 4 Hoops isn't the best example because as a game, it's $24,000 to $30,000, and it's enormous. Like, that's something that cannot work for the street. But recently at Amusement Expo, I did see a game that was very similar to Connect 4 Hoops called Zombie Jam by the really big Crane company, and I don't recall what the price point was on those. I mean, it does fit into more locations due to its compact size, and it certainly has a lower price point than the enormous Connect 4 Hoops does. And so in my view, what these major manufacturers need to do to survive is to be starting to focus on these smaller games. Instead of just doing these big environmental cabinets, do standard versions like you used to do, standard uprights. So instead of Halo Fireteam Raven with 2 guns, or Walking Dead with 2 guns, but in both of those cases you have benches or you have seats inside and it's all enclosed. You just have the monitor portion and control console portion, or you do a redesign and just have something a little bit more compact with 2 guns on it, as opposed to the big spectacle. But also on top of that, there's opportunity for update kits. I mean, this is one thing that I've been kind of baffled that we haven't seen much of in recent years, is being able to, or for these manufacturers to release some sort of content update that they would charge for. Now, most recent one that I remember was maybe 2016, 2017, and that was when Bandai Namco Amusements released a Star Wars Episode 7 themed level for the Star Wars Battle Pod. But the problem with that one was it was just one level, and they wanted $5,000 for it. It seemed to be made more for Dave & Buster's than other locations, but granted, the game itself was somewhere around $35,000, so $5,000 didn't seem like much in that regard, to be fair to it. But what I've been thinking of oftentimes over the years is, why isn't there a content update for Jurassic Park? You have Jurassic World 1 and 2 that have been released, where they introduced a dinosaur like the Indominus Rex. Why not release a set of levels that, a trio set of levels that would fit in with the other content that's already there, where you're trying to contain an Indominus Rex? Granted, I know there would be licensing and there would be a cost to that, so I don't know how much an upgrade kit would cost. But as long as it wouldn't be like $5,000 for a trio set of levels, if that's possible to do, maybe something like $1,500 or $2,000. Now, granted, I know these numbers sound totally outrageous if you're just into console gaming, but in the arcade space, the average cost of a machine is maybe about $7,500 to $8,000, and so just everything's scaled up quite a bit. So I know this might sound silly for content updates, and I've heard people whine before. It was, oh, why isn't this? If this game's on Steam for $20, why do they want to charge $1,000 for it? Well, it's a very different business model, because when these games are set up in an arcade situation, they're making money. And so the people who develop it have to make their money back, have to make a profit. And then people like me the distributors want to make a profit off it too, so they can pay their people and keep their operations going. And then myself, I need to make my investment back and then some, so that I can pay my other bills and pay myself. And so there's all these layers on top of it where there's a lot of money that needs to be made to make up for it. And so that's why you have such higher prices on kits and things like that. But speaking of kits, that's another place too where I know that most major manufacturers really have not been into kits. Raw Thrills did do a kit for supercars several years ago, and operators loved it. I mean, Mr. Minter, who I talked to, was talking about how he had all these supercar conversions where he'd converted out Hydro Thunders or Tokyo Drifts or other things into the supercars. I had a pair of converted supercars for several years, and it was my number one game for a long time, at least until I got Jurassic Park Arcade. And so I think that it's a great time for kits to come around right now and refresh the old games that are out there, because one thing that there's no lack of right now are game cabinets. Now, a lot of the cabinets are proprietary designs, but with the right kit, I mean, a lot of kits in the past have come with artwork that can be adapted to a variety of different machines and configurations. And the hardware guts, you're usually just swapping it out. Sometimes you may have to swap out the guns on something, but I mean, a lot of these mounted gun games that have come out, the guns are kind of generic. I mean, you look at Jurassic Park guns, they've been reused on Space Invaders Frenzy and Bust-A-Move Frenzy and Nerf. I mean, they're all just kind of the same. Plastic shells, maybe with slight variations to them. But either way, there's a lot of mounted gun games out there, and so it should make it easy to come up with a conversion kit to swap something that may be older out and on its last legs out with some completely brand new game. Or, as I mentioned before, just an update to that. Like, I'm sure The Walking Dead 2 could use an update. Operation Ghost, I mean, that one had been receiving some updates, just needed a graphics update, in my opinion. Or House of the Dead Scarlet Dawn is a great one that could use just a standard upright game. It may not necessarily need a software update because it's still relatively new. But if they were to do these things, that would be on the lower cost end. I think that a lot more operators would be willing to look at those things as ways to help bring people back into their locations and save some money, because again, that's all on our minds. We don't want to go out of business. If I go out of business, then that puts my family in danger of starving. I mean, this is my livelihood, and so I don't want to see anybody have to close. Of course, their safety is also a top concern too. Is how do you keep things clean and safe so that there aren't any infections and that the spread dies down to nothing, while still being able to make a living. It's really tough to do, and I know I'm not the only one that's in this situation. Pretty much everybody is, but there are ways to still do this safely. And as I've seen since I've been open since May 1st, there are still plenty of people that are interested in playing, and they're just taking more precautions than they used to. I've seen plenty of people come in with disinfectant wipes, and we've been wiping down the games frequently, usually within every hour after things are being played. We have hand sanitizer here. We use face masks. I don't have one on right now because there's nobody around, and it's more for when there are people around. But yeah, so we'll get through this. It's just for me, I think the best way that we'll move forward on getting content out there is through these lower cost solutions. And that's also why I've touted the X Arcadia a lot. That's one machine that I have here, and I have different videos on my channel about this, is that is the only kit system on the market right now that I can really think of. Well, I guess Pump It Up has its kits too, so that should count. But either way, because of the X Arcadia, there's been a number of games I've been able to add. I've been able to add 3 brand new games this year through them, and I'll be able to add more. I'm still contemplating what my 4th game should be for it, because it holds up to 4 games, but still those are only between $1,000 and $1,500 for each game. And so that provides me the opportunity to keep things fresh and add new stuff in without breaking the bank. And so that they stand a good chance at benefiting from all this, but I will be surprised and maybe a little disappointed if nobody else in this industry takes advantage of it. Because like I know Sega in the past has released some kits, or they teased a kit. They once teased a Sega Rally 3 kit that was meant to go into all sorts of other driving cabinets, but for some reason they just didn't release that. Namco kind of did the same thing with Tekken Tag Tournament 2, where they had some kits for that, but they never promoted them, and so I don't really know what happened with that. And so unfortunately I don't really know of many arcade versions of those that are out there. But again, we have the cabinets, that's not a problem. A lot of operators would love to refresh their old stuff, and that may be a way to help keep one of these manufacturers afloat, so that when we finally do get out of all this, that there will still be some left standing. Because I do believe there will be plenty of locations that are still around, because if we don't have any new products to get our hands on, then we can still rely on old used games, or almost new games that are used, and that can keep you going for a while. It's amazing how much life a lot of these games have for years and years and years after they were first released. Like I have a Blazing Angels here that I first got 12 years ago when I opened in 2008, and it still makes pretty much the same that it did back then. That's been a fantastic game for me to have. Or Carnival. You know, I got a Carnival back when I opened for $150, but it would haul in somewhere around $2,000 a year. And so there are certain games which are so well done, that are so timeless, that really can withstand that test of time and keep going. And so you don't always need new, and that's why so many operated locations, street locations, tend to focus on the used games. But those are my thoughts, maybe a little long-winded as usual, as to what this industry can do to survive and eventually thrive again. I mean, yeah, the Super Deluxe games are cool, but those are not going to save this business. To me, from my perspective, yeah, it's going to be the kits, it's going to be upgrades, it's going to be ways to put a fresh coat of paint on something old. But let me know what you think, if you agree or disagree, or if you have some other innovative ideas for what arcades can do to get through this all. And thank you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.